to ESV TV. My name's Mark, and today we're here with Rich from iZotope, and we're going to be talking about VocalSynth 2, which is a new plugin, or a new set of plugins from iZotope. So Rich, why don't you tell us a bit about them?
Sure, yeah, so basically we wanted to take the opportunity today to, as you say, cover VocalSynth 2, which is a complete overhaul of the original VocalSynth 1 plugin. Now, it's important, I think, for a new customer who's not necessarily used to the feature set to kind of see the whole thing in its entirety. So yeah, we really wanted to kind of give a full overview covering all the features and functions, and also then detailing the latest and greatest features that we've just added. Perfect. Why don't we jump straight in? VocalSynth 2 is available as a standalone plugin, or can be purchased as part of the new Creative Suite, which features 7 innovative and inspiring software tools. It has Iris 2, which is a sample-based modular synthesizer with spectral filtering, which comes complete with an 11 gig sample library. Trash 2 Expanded, which is a multi-band dual-stage distortion with advanced post-filtering. Break Tweaker Expanded, which is a drum sculpting and beat sequencing environment, which comes within all the extensive and extended libraries. Stutter Edit, which is a MIDI controlled beat repeating effects plugin, which mangles audio in sync with the DAW. DDLY, which is a dynamic delay, which has a unique threshold control, which allows you to actually separate your audio coming into the plugin according to its dynamic range. So signals going over the threshold are delayed by a completely separate delay module to those under the threshold. We also have Mobius Filter, which is a plugin that utilizes the concept of Shepard's tones to create filter sweeps that appear to be endlessly rising or descending. And of course VocalSynth 2, which we'll explore in more detail now. So what is VocalSynth 2? As the name would suggest, VocalSynth 2 is a vocal processing plugin which provides 5 amazing vocal modules: BioVox, Vocoder, Conky Vox, Talkbox and PolyVox, along with 7 Stonebox Effects: Distort, Filter, Transform, Shred, Chorus, Delay and Ring Mod, finished off with pitch correction. VocalSynth 2 also works within the larger iZotope ecosystem, allowing it to work with Neutron 2's visual mixer. Now if I bring this instance up here and I bring up my VocalSynth, you'll see that this inter-plugin communication actually allows the 2 plugins to work with one another. So as you can see, as I move the visual mixer node here and I'm increasing my level, you can see that also repeated on the VocalSynth 2 window. And if I pan from left to right, you can also see the pan controls there in the output section of the VocalSynth 2 plugin. Likewise, from here, I can also control the pan and the level. That also applies to the masking meter and tonal balance control within the Neutron plugin suite. Let's take a look at the vocal modules in more detail. So what's BioVox? BioVox is a scientific modelling of the human vocal tract. And the parameters that we have here allow you to adjust things like nasality, breath, so you can make the audio more breathy. You can adjust the clarity of the overall audio coming through. In addition, you can also adjust how the vowels are formed, so you can make it sound more E or O or U or A using those vowel formants there. Now if I just play a section for this, as you can see, when I'm bringing up the nasality, it makes it sound more like it's coming from the nose. Equally, I can bring up the breaths to make the vocal sound more breathy. Let's just play that through again one more time. So if I open up the advanced menu here, you can hear as I'm moving it around the vowel pad here, it's actually changing the vowel sound that's predominantly cutting through on the vocal. So it's almost only making the oo sound now as I move over the o sound there. So that's BioVox. So moving on to Vocoder, if I enable the Vocoder here, this is emulating the classic vocoders that were sort of really used predominantly in the 70s by people like Kraftwerk and more recently with people like Daft Punk. Now, there are 3 settings that you have here that will change how harsh or how soft the vocoder actually appears to be. So you have the smooth setting, which obviously gives a much smoother vocoder, going into the vintage, which is kind of middle of the road, through to the hard setting. Now, essentially what that does is it increases the number of bands that are available within the vocoder itself. What's actually quite nice here as well is that in the advanced view, you can have the ability to adjust the volume of the frequency bands within the vocoder. So you can actually make it more top heavy, so much more higher frequencies, or much more lower frequencies. You can also adjust the pan so that you can actually pan the bands within the vocoder to create some very, very wide and open effects. Moving over to Conky Vox, this emulates a kind of speak and spell type effect. So if I play my keys here on the keyboard, you can hear that it's actually generating a kind of, as I say, speak and spell type effect. Now, you've got the option to adjust the bits, which essentially is like bit crushing the signal to the point where it's almost unrecognisable. Equally, if we adjust the bytes, you're elongating the vowel sounds of the vocal that's passing through. So you're actually then almost up at the top setting there, you're almost only hearing the vowel sounds as the person sings or speaks. We also have the bats control, which adds a kind of grit to the vocal, almost like a kind of Batman style gravelly throatiness to the vocal that's cutting through. So there we have Conky Vox. Then we have Talkbox, which is an emulation of the old Talkbox units that were made famous by people like Pete Frampton and The Who. So with a Talkbox, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a few moments, you can actually, rather than using the synthesizers built into VocalSynth, you can use an external audio source. So it may be that you have a synth that you want to drive that, or a guitar or something like that. You can use that to actually then simulate the Talkbox. So the controls that you have there are drive to kind of increase the incoming signal level to make it a bit more driven and a bit more distorted. You also have the speaker control, which adjusts the effect of the speaker that's actually mounted, the compression driver that's actually inside a Talkbox. So this is using a convolution technique to allow that to actually emulate the Talkboxes of old. Your formants allows you to adjust how high pitch or low pitch the effect seems. So it's changing the frequency of the formants to be lower or higher. And then you have the mode here, which allows you to switch between a dark, classic, and a bright filter. That's the output filter. So as I press my keys on the keyboard now, you can hear that it's very, very high frequency. Set it to classic mode, it's giving you a more broad filter that allows both the highs and the lows through, and switch it to dark, and it's very much on the heavier bass side of things. So next up we have Polyvox. And Polyvox can create some very, very great sounding kind of chorusy effects. And it allows you to play in the notes that you want to be part of that chorus effect, certainly if you've got it in MIDI mode. So at the moment, this level control over here is actually controlling the amount of the dry signal coming through the plugin. So at the moment I'm not playing any notes on the keyboard, and I've pulled the dry signal level all the way down so you can't actually hear anything. So I can bring in some of the dry signal, so that's being passed through the plugin straight from the audio track itself. Now if I start to play notes on my keyboard, which I'm just going to call up my keyboard editor so that you can see. So as you can see now, I'm playing notes onto the keyboard. And there you can see you've got this kind of chorus style effect as I'm losing keys on the keyboard. Now, similar to some of the other vocal modules there, you have a formant which allows you to control whether or not that's a high pitch or a low pitch to the formant. So I can make them sound more Mickey Mouse or like some being from hell. You can also add this control here, which is humanize, which actually makes the relationship between the pitch and the delay more like the sort of human interaction between various people singing simultaneously. So that's Polyvox. So one of the really great things about these vocal modules, they're all absolutely amazing standalone. So they all sound unbelievable as individual discrete plugins. But what's interesting is the way that VocalSynth actually allows you to combine the resultant output of all of these modules together. So as well as being able to use each one in situ, there you have your BioVox, your Vocoder, your Conky Vox, Talkbox and Polyvox. We can actually enable all of those to really add a huge number of layers and really kind of totally morph the vocals into something that you just wouldn't be able to dream of without this tool. So as you can see, each one of the modules has a level control, and down here in the anemone display you can see that particular contributor to the overall signal expanding and contracting as I increase the level. So we can then work on the overall blend . Now you can also adjust the level from the anemone display as well, so there you can see I'm actually overall adjusting each one of the contributions of the individual vocal modules to the output of the VocalSynth application or plugin. That can also be said for the Stonebox Effects, which are down at the bottom here, and just so you're aware as well, this level control here, as I briefly mentioned earlier on, allows me to bring in some of the dry or non-vocal module processed signal. So I can actually then send a certain amount of the unprocessed signal through to the distortions and all the Stonebox effects that you can see at the bottom there. So now let's take a look at the 7 Stonebox effects that we find at the bottom of the plugin window here. Similarly to the vocal modules that we have at the top, each process has its own activation button to switch it on and off or to insert it into the signal path. So we are able to switch on individual processes or plugins as we need to. There's also discrete level controls in each process as well, so we can actually control the wet-dry mix of the signal coming through from this control here, so the wet-dry mix here going through to the individual processors. So all of these processes are designed in a way to complement the vocal processing, so they are geared towards being used for vocals. So the distortion adds some nice additional harmonics and has a number of settings to allow you to adjust how warm and fuzzy you make that, or how harsh and crisp you make it. The filters are designed for vocal production so that, for example, we have a low pass filter that increases the sort of richness of the low end of a vocal, high pass filter which adds presence to the vocal. If we go over to the transform section, this is a convolution process which simulates amplifiers and cab combinations, and simple things like radio, for example, where you can actually bring in the modelling of a 70s or 60s style transistor radio speaker and cabinet and transistors. Shred is an interesting effect which basically glitches or stutters the audio coming in sync with the project. So you have a number of controls which will actually allow you to adjust the duration and the frequency of the stutters. So let me just play a section for you. So you can hear the vocals glitching there and stuttering at different rates as the audio plays through. And that's actually an interesting combination of these three sections here, where I can determine the interval, 1/8, 1/32, 1/16, and I can then change those as I need to, and then adjust the sequence in which these options are played back. So there's 16 sequences which allow me to adjust what option is played back next. So if I switch up to 5, for example, you'll see these dots will start to move. Let me just take that down. So you can see it's actually working through a sequence, and that's adjusted and changed according to this control here, which then actually totally mashes and mangles the glitching and the stuttering of the audio played through. Next up we have the latest, or one of the latest processes that's been added to the Stonebox Effects, which is Chorus. This can be used to sort of really add a warmth and a presence to the vocals, and just really sort of help to polish the mix off. Delay, which needs no explanation. This can actually be synchronized to the tempo of the track, or can be adjusted manually using the timer option that we have here, which is in Hertz. So yeah, you can either have it synchronized to the project, or totally freewheel it and adjust it yourself. And lastly, again, one of the other options that we've added, or another one of the processes that's been added in this particular version, is the ring mod. Now that can be used to generate your standard or traditional metallic ring modulated effects, or you can use it to simulate a tremolo effect. So I'll just demonstrate that for you very quickly. So with a low frequency setting and a low LFO, we've generated quite a nice sort of tremolo effect. As we bring up the speed of that, you'll start to hear those metallic sounds coming through. So that rounds up all of the new processes, and also covers the older processes, and the fact that we can now reorder this is one of the other features that we've added to VocalSynth 2. So let's take a look and familiarise ourselves with the VocalSynth GUI. So we start off at the top here. You have the ability to actually name the instance of VocalSynth 2. So if you want to be able to identify this when you are using Neutron, the visual mixer, you can actually give this a name that will be more easily identifiable by you, so that when you're actually mixing using the visual mixer, you can actually clearly see and identify the exact instance of the VocalSynth plugin that you want to control. Next up, we have the global input mode. So here you are able to choose between auto mode, MIDI mode, and sidechain mode. Now, what that actually means is, with regards to the processes or the vocal modules, BioVox, Vocoder, Conky Vox, and Talkbox, they actually have a synthesizer engine internally within the VocalSynth plugin that can be triggered using auto mode. So if you don't have an external keyboard, or you are not particularly musically inclined, and you don't want to have to try and work out chords and keys and all those kind of things, you can simply put the VocalSynth plugin into auto mode, and the synth engine is then driven directly by the audio that you have coming into the plugin. So for example, I have a section of audio that I'm going to play now. You'll be able to hear in the background, first of all I'll turn up the dry signal level, and I'll turn off the instances of the modules, and I'll just slowly bring those in so that you can actually hear the synth engine active. Now, as you hear, the vocal is dry. If I now add Vox and Vocoder and Conky Vox and Talkbox, all those tones that you're hearing underneath the actual vocal are all being generated now automatically, because we're in auto mode, by the plugin itself. So if I take the dry signal out, everything that you're hearing is what's being simulated by the auto mode, taking the incoming signal and generating these synth signals to drive the modules. So the difference or the relevance of that is that if we have a MIDI keyboard connected or a controller keyboard connected, we can switch into MIDI mode. Now, instead of using the automatically generated signals that the plugin itself generates, we can use the external keyboard to drive the synthesizer to actually generate the notes and all the harmonies and so on that are going on by a keyboard, simply by pressing the keys on a keyboard as we play. So I'm going to do that now. If I hit play on the loop, I'm in MIDI mode, so I can't actually hear anything until I press the keys on my keyboard. Now, I'm only holding down one note at this point in time, so it's only going to generate one tone or one signal. I can then add subsequent notes on the keyboard to generate more and more frequencies within the synth engine. So that's the difference between auto mode and MIDI mode. Now, in order to set that up, what you have to do is actually have the plugin sat on a MIDI track or an instrument track, and you then, using a sidechain, which is an alternative input to the plugin, you then select your audio signal. So here, for me, at the moment, it's this Vox stereo, which happens to be this track directly above it. So I can see the audio region on the screen here. This is the audio region that's coming in on the sidechain, so this region here, and then the MIDI that I would record on the instrument track would then also be kind of added to that. So the sidechain feeds into one side of the plugin, and then the action on the keyboard allows me to generate the frequencies of the synth modules that are running behind all of the vocal modules. So then the last mode is sidechain mode. Now, sidechain mode is particularly important for processes like the the Talkbox, which can actually be triggered and actually morphs the signal of the sidechain into the signal, into the vocal signal. So rather than using the internal synthesizers that we're triggering via MIDI mode for Vox, Vocoder, Conky Vox and Polyvox, you're actually able to use an external input, so that the sounds generated by an external synthesizer or a guitar can then be used to drive the Talkbox. So if I just close this instance here, so if I click on this region here now, I actually have an instance of VocalSynth. As you can see here, it's in sidechain mode, and the audio that's feeding it is what's on audio 24, which is actually this pad synth that I've got here. So if we just solo this one, I'm just going to take that out, we solo this, you can hear the pad. If I now unsolo the vocal track, you can hear now that the synth on track 24 is actually being used as one of the trigger for the Talkbox here. So the synth is driving the Talkbox and is kind of morphing that with the audio that's on track 19, which is where this plugin is actually situated. So I'll just bring that over here and I'll take out the dry signal. So you can hear that the Talkbox plugin itself has kind of combined the audio coming in on the sidechain, that pad that we were listening to, with the vocal on the track that it's situated. So this track here is where my dialogue or my vocal is. So this is my vocal track. This is also where my vocal synth is situated. And I'm taking information from this synth track and using that to drive the Talkbox, which is where I'm getting that effect. So those are the 3 global input modes, and that's how you can use those. Next up we have our presets. So if we select presets here, we actually have presets specifically for when you're using MIDI mode. So they are presets that are designed and work very well when you are using a keyboard. Equally, there are certain presets that lend themselves more towards when you're working in auto mode. So they are clearly differentiated between these 2 modes that you can see here. And we go into each of these menu areas just simply by clicking on it. We can then select a preset and it instantly loads that. And we can actually we can hit play on the track and actually go through presets to hear what they're going to sound like. We can also use these 2 buttons here to cycle through the list of all the presets, as you can see by the different parameters changing and updating as I cycle through. We then have settings and help. So you can actually access some of the settings for the plugin here, changing the metering mode in the middle of the plugin, which we can switch from the anemone to wave. So we'll keep it on an anemone for now. There's various other options that you can enable here for low latency and switching on tooltips and so on. Then we also have access to the help documentation, which is very useful direct from the plugin itself. So that gives you an idea of what parameters and controls we have up here. Then just to give you an overview of what else we see in the lower section of the plugin, we have our 5 voice modules: Vox, Vocoder, Conky Vox, Talkbox and Polyvox. We have our metering area and our XY area. The XY area is useful because it allows us to actually select certain parameters from the vocal modules and allows us to then adjust those, as you can see in the Vocoder and the Conky Vox modules up at the top there. You can actually map certain features and functions so that on the X and the Y axis you are able to control and manipulate those in combination with one another. Over here, the pitch section, this is actually very relevant to the MIDI mode. So if we're in auto mode, the high, mid and low register here is actually used by the plugin so that it understands what particular kind of frequency band you want it to look at in terms of, you know, the synth sounds that it generates. So if you have a particularly high vocal, you need to switch it into high mode. If it's a very low frequency vocal, you need to switch in low mode. For most applications, we recommend keeping it in the medium pitched vocal area. This is also useful and is also beneficial for the correction here. So you use these controls to actually help the pitch correction engine to make its decisions on the vocal that's coming in. So on that subject, the register controls here allow you to select which frequency areas or which pitch areas the plugin is really focusing on. The control that you have down at the bottom here is your wet-dry mix with regards to, or it's actually your wet-dry mix for the unprocessed pitch-corrected signal going to the effects units at the bottom. Now, if you disable pitch correction, then that's actually then just a wet-dry mix for the dry signal going through to the processes at the bottom, the Stonebox Effects. So if we have that faded up, but we have correction turned off, the signal will pass through here into the Stonebox Effects uncorrected. It's only when we enable the correction that pitch correction is then active. And at that point, we can either switch it to chromatic correction, which is a setting that you would use if you don't know the key. If you do know the key and you know the major, minor scale and the root note, you can then set that in this control here. you also then have additional controls to adjust the speed at which the pitch correction engine will actually correct the erroneous note, and also the strength. So how rigidly it applies the scale and the root note to the incoming signal. Over on the right hand side you have your output controls. You can control the overall mix between the actual audio track, so your raw unprocessed vocal, which is all the way down at the bottom, and the totality of your processing, which is all the way up at the top. You have the ability to pan the output left and right, and you also have a stereo width control so that you can really open out the signal and really either bring the signal into a very narrow signal or really bring it out as wide as you possibly can to spill out the stereo field. And another parameter which is interesting is this gate control, which actually you can set this, and it's only then when the signal exceeds a certain threshold that the processing that you see here is then applied to that signal. So you could have set a very high threshold which allows a great proportion of the signal to go through before the threshold is exceeded, and then it's only then that these processes would then be brought into the signal. So I can simulate that again. I feel so much more than So the higher I make the gate, the less of the actual signal we're going to get through. And you can hear that's just now starting to push in at the top. Now obviously this is quite an abrupt effect which you'd really need to work in combination with the balance control there to kind of blend in the unprocessed and the processed signals so that you can just have that effect coming in on the very higher end of the audio that's coming through. So then the last controls that we just want to quickly review here are the Stonebox Effects. So we have 7 of these Stonebox Effects along the bottom. Chorus, Distort, Filter, Transform, Shred, Delay and Ring Mod. Ring Mod and Chorus are our new processes, so Chorus over on the left hand side and Ring Mod on the right. But what's interesting is that we can now actually reorder those, so we can just click and drag these processes and that reorders the signal path. So that is also another new feature that we've added to VocalSynth 2.
Well, thanks for that, Rich.
No problem.
I certainly learned a lot. I hope you guys did too. And don't forget you can get your copy of VocalSynth 2 as well as the entire range of iZotope plugins on the website. That's eastwoodsoundandvision.com. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to give us a like and a subscribe. We'll see you next time.